Have you ever found yourself just completely caught by a story? A mystery that just kind of sticks with you, really gnawing at the edges of your understanding. Well, today we're delving into one of those stories. It's profoundly unsettling. It's the disappearance of Olivia Lone Bear. She was a 32-year-old Indigenous mother of five from the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in North Dakota, vanished back in October 2017. Her story is, well, it's poignant, and it's just full of these lingering questions, especially because, while her body was eventually found 9 months later, submerged in a truck, her cause of death, officially it remains undetermined.
Right, and what Olivia's story immediately does is expose this brutal truth. For Indigenous women, an individual tragedy like this, it's almost always completely tied to generations of systemic neglect, and of course the broader crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women and people. So our mission in this deep dive, it isn't just to recount the facts of Olivia's case. We really want to pull apart the timeline, her disappearance, the search. Understand all those complex layers of context surrounding it. We'll try to connect her personal journey for answers to that wider societal landscape that, frankly, often makes justice so hard to find.
Yeah, and our sources, they really paint a vivid picture. They show how these personal accounts just weave together with the broader research to reveal how deep this crisis runs. We'll be sifting through all of it, trying to get you a clearer understanding. Okay, so let's unpack this. Let's delve into the journey for answers in Olivia Lone Bear's case. All right, so Olivia Carey Lone Bear. Her traditional name was Cedar Woman. She was born October 11, 1985, in Stanley, North Dakota. A member of the Dripping Dirt clan, described as a devoted, hardworking mother, just absolutely adored her five kids, lived on the Fort Berthold Indian Reservation in Newtown, and then her life just took this sudden, really baffling turn. October 25, 2017, that night she was last seen leaving the Sportsman's Bar in Newtown. She was driving a borrowed truck, a teal Chevy Silverado pickup, North Dakota plates, 839-CRC. Now, her family, they largely believe she went home after the bar, and that theory, it seems supported because her cell phone, her wallet, money, even the clothes she wore that night, they were later found at her house. Her father reported her missing 2 days later. That was a Friday. But what makes the timeline so unsettling are these details, these last known communications. Her friend, James Hoffenke, he'd lent her the truck. He was among the last people to hear from her. There were text messages from Olivia's phone to Hoffenke that night. One said, "Well, we had a little bonfire, now we are going mudding, wish me luck." Okay, fine. But then it was followed by this really stark two-word message at 10 to 4 p.m., just goodbye. Another text went out at 10:37 p.m., this one to Adam Bangin, a guy she dated previously. And then, to add to the mystery, Facebook records show her cover photo was changed 11 to 4 p.m. Her phone last accessed Facebook at 11:38 p.m. And after that, nothing. No more outgoing activity. Finding her things at home, those last messages. It's just profoundly unsettling. What does that critical window of time, or maybe the lack of one, what does that mean for an investigation like this?
Well, that initial window, right? Those first 24, maybe 48 hours, it's often called the golden hours in any missing person's case. It's just crucial because that's when the trail is freshest, evidence is most accessible. But Olivia's experience, it tragically shows how a slow response can just let critical evidence vanish. Leads go cold before an investigation even really gets off the ground. And then, after 9 agonizing months of searching, her body was found. July 31st, 2018. In that submerged teal truck in Lake Sakakawea. The truck was deep, 21 feet down, about 400 feet from shore, and only about 1.5 miles from her home. She was found buckled into the passenger seat, and the truck's windows were broken. But here's where that powerful void comes in. The official cause of death, ruled undetermined. The report cited no definitive traumatic, natural, or toxicological causes. So this lack of a clear answer, even after finding her, it leaves her family, her community just grappling with the fundamental how and why.
Yeah, it's truly perplexing. Even with her body and the truck recovered, those basic questions, how, why officially, they just hang there unanswered. In the initial search, well, volunteer searchers, despite everything they did, they couldn't find Olivia or the truck. And you have to picture the scale here. The Fort Berthold Indian Reservation, it spans nearly 1 million acres. Imagine trying ground searches there. It's incredibly difficult. Olivia's family, they were very critical, very openly critical of the 3 affiliated tribes police department, the TATPD. They described just a painfully slow response. They alleged the police didn't even act on the missing persons report until the following Monday. And remember, she was reported missing on Friday. And the family's frustration, it just seemed to get worse. There were allegations about how the tribal police handled things. Olivia's cousin, Matthew Lone Bear, he claimed police told him they, quote, couldn't investigate Olivia's disappearance because there was no crime scene. He also alleged they sort of berated her father, Tex Lone Bear, saying things like, this is not the only thing going on with the Fort Berthold reservation. Just wow. And Matthew also claimed police dismissed tips, didn't follow up on OnStar data inquiries, even turned down help from other agencies, like the North Dakota Game and Fish Department, for sonar searches. Their reason: a lack of boats. Matthew got so frustrated he apparently posted photos of unused police watercraft on Facebook, basically shaming the department. His whole account just paints a picture of complete dismissal. What are the ripple effects of that kind of alleged neglect, not just on a case, but on a whole community's trust?
Oh, the consequences are profound. Absolutely. This pattern you described, the slow response, the resource scarcity, it's not just, inefficiency. It really feels like a symptom of deeper issues, like institutional biases and that jurisdictional nightmare that exists on so many tribal lands. It doesn't just hinder one investigation. It creates this corrosive erosion of faith in the whole justice system. Families feel isolated, unheard. And ironically, that distrust, it can make future investigations even harder. People are less likely to come forward. And to really get the jurisdictional problem, okay, imagine a crime happens on tribal land. But the suspect isn't a tribal member, tribal police. Often they just don't have the authority to prosecute that person. So the case might fall to federal agencies, like the FBI. But unfortunately, they frequently decline to pursue a lot of these cases. Maybe they cite lack of resources or not enough evidence. Then maybe it shifts to state or county law enforcement. But they might not know the tribal territory well, or they might just be reluctant to get deeply involved. It leaves families stuck in this bureaucratic limbo. Nobody seems to take full responsibility. In Olivia's case, the investigation was eventually taken over by the BIA, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That was in February 2018. The FBI joined later, and they're still involved. As recently as May 2022, the FBI got a search warrant for Google location history data. They're trying to identify electronic devices that might have been near the discovery site the night Olivia vanished. And there's still a $10,000 reward out there for information that leads to identifying who might be responsible.
So when official systems seem inadequate or maybe uncooperative, like we've heard here, it often falls to ordinary people, doesn't it? People stepping up in extraordinary ways. And this is where Lissa Yellowbird-Chase enters Olivia's story. She's also a member of the MHA Nation, like Olivia. And she founded this volunteer group, the Sahnish Scouts of North Dakota, back in 2015. Lissa joined the search for Olivia. She said she was driven by this nagging feeling about a specific kind of secluded area of Lake Sakakawea. So she went out there in a small boat, apparently with a half-broken motor, using just fishing sonar. And in July 2018, she found something, a rectangular object, just a few hundred feet from shore. So from there, she talked to Keith Cormican. He's a technical diver, a sonar expert, founded a group called Bruce's Legacy. And he looked at her findings and confirmed, yeah, that was likely a vehicle, and just as she suspected. July 31st, 2018, a dive team went down, confirmed her discovery. And that led to recovering Olivia's truck and, tragically, her body.
What's really striking about Lissa Yellowbird-Chase is her backstory, her incredible resilience. Her personal journey is it fuels this unwavering dedication she has. I mean, her life has been marked by immense adversity. Things like sexual assault, sex trafficking, addiction, homelessness, even incarceration. Yet after getting sober in prison, she went and earned a criminal justice degree, found her purpose as a legal advocate. So this personal history, it's not despite the challenges, it feels like it's because of them. It forged her into this really powerful advocate who truly understands the vulnerabilities that Indigenous women face. And she became this crucial figure in other cases, too. She helped find perpetrators for Christopher Casey Clark. His body was never actually found. And she located her own niece, Carly Yellowbird, after Carla went missing. This commitment she has to finding the missing, often, paying out of her own pocket, it highlights this profound dedication to her community, even when it sometimes puts her at odds with people or with official bodies. Now, it is important to note, though, despite her absolutely pivotal role in finding Olivia, there was some tension with Olivia's family. Matthew Lone Bear reportedly called Lissa a thorn in our side and said they'd actually asked her to leave the search months before the discovery. And because of that tension, Lissa didn't attend Olivia's funeral.
That's complex. But despite those personal challenges, Lissa and the Sahnish Scouts, they continue this vital work. They respond to disappearances in the Bakken oil fields. They support, I think the number is over 100 families now. Their grassroots efforts really highlight how communities often just have to shoulder the burden themselves, right? Stepping in where official channels have fallen short, basically protecting their own. And stepping back again, looking at the bigger picture from Olivia's case, her story, sadly, it's just not an isolated incident. Not at all. The Searching for Olivia Lone Bear website specifically notes that with the Bakken oil boom, things like trafficking and just dangerous situations for Indigenous women, they skyrocketed. They highlight what they call an epidemic of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, MMIWG, or sometimes you hear MIP for Indigenous people in that whole region. And one of the huge challenges, as our sources point out, is there's just no reliable official database for these cases. None. So you have civilian-led efforts trying to fill the gap. Like Justice for Native Women, they've recorded about 600 names. Anita Lucchesi's MMIW database has over 2,500 names. It's a monumental effort, trying to make the invisible visible.
Right, and that lack of official, comprehensive data, it tragically underscores this deeply troubling reality. The lives of Indigenous women are just too often rendered invisible or somehow seen as less valuable by the larger system. The statistics we do have, though, they are chilling. They demand our attention. Indigenous women and girls are murdered 10 times more than other ethnicities. Murder is the third leading cause of death for Indigenous women. Think about this. A staggering 84.3% experience violence. 56.1% experience sexual violence. 48.8% are stalked. They are 1.7 times more likely to experience violence and 2 times more likely to be raped than white women. And the murder rate, 3 times higher than white American women.
It's hard to even hear those numbers without feeling the immense weight of them. These aren't just stats, they're lives. Families devastated.
Exactly. And it's the grim reality that those numbers, shocking as they are, they're likely an undercount. It's this invisible crisis that just continues to unfold. Like in 2016 alone, North Dakota accounted for 125 of the 5,712 nationwide missing Native women cases reported that year. But experts, they all believe the actual number is much, much higher. Why? Underreporting, racial misclassification, sometimes victims are listed as Hispanic or white, and just a general lack of media coverage compared to other cases. We see echoes of this in popular culture sometimes. The film Wind River, often cited as being inspired by true events, but it rarely reflects the reality for Native families. That lack of traumatic closure or swift justice, that's often the norm. And the horrific case of Savanna LaFontaine Greywind from Fargo, North Dakota, where her baby was literally cut from her womb and she was murdered by a neighbor, it just tragically illustrates the brutality these communities face and the profound grief of families left without answers or justice.
And bringing it back to Fort Berthold, the Bakken oil boom had this specific devastating impact there. This huge influx of workers, thousands of them, mostly out of state, transient men, often without families, lots of money to burn. And reports indicate this led to increased violence, more drug use, just an overall more dangerous environment, particularly for women. We see this pattern in other cases too. Robin Fox, another MHA member, disappeared in 2014. Her body was found nearby, circumstances deemed suspicious, but no public cause of death released. And again, tribal law enforcement was reportedly unhelpful to volunteers searching for her and Olivia herself. She'd once been beaten up at a bar frequented by oil field workers, by an ex-boyfriend's wife. It's just a grim reminder of the dangers they face daily.
And this whole problem, it's just compounded by that complex patchwork of jurisdictions we talked about. It bears repeating. Tribal police, limited authority, especially over non-natives on reservations. So the crucial consequence, if the perpetrator isn't a tribal member, tribal courts often can't prosecute them. The case defaults to federal agencies like the FBI, who, as we said, often decline to prosecute. Maybe citing resources, maybe evidence issues. It leaves cases in this legal limbo. Then you have multiple counties often sharing jurisdiction over a reservation. That adds to the confusion, maybe reluctance among state and county sheriffs to respond effectively or commit resources. It creates this devastating no man's land for victims and families. The NHA Nation, they tried to combat sex trafficking with Lauren's Law back in 2014, but its effectiveness is limited. Why? Because the tribe hasn't met certain federal requirements. Requirements needed to expand powers granted by the Violence Against Women Act via Kinswetic. Specifically, powers to prosecute non-enrolled defendants for things like domestic violence or sexual assault outside of a committed relationship. So even well-intentioned tribal laws can face these huge legal hurdles.
Okay, so despite these just overwhelming systemic challenges, some steps are being taken, albeit slowly, to address the MMIW crisis. But I think for an audience really concerned about this, the question is, how much real-world change are these initiatives actually driving? So we have Savanna's Act, named after Savanna LaFontaine Greywind, signed into law in 2020. It requires the Department of Justice to review and revise policies for MIP cases. There is Executive Order 13898, Operation Lady Justice, that created a task force in 2019. And then in 2021, the Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, announced the formation of the Missing and Murdered Unit, the MMU, specifically to focus on analyzing and solving these MMIT cases. And we even have a designated national day for missing and murdered Native women and girls, May 5th. 5th, so the awareness is growing, officially at least.
Right, and that's the critical point. While Savanna's Act mandates policy reviews and the MMU brings focused resources, those underlying, deeply entrenched cultural and systemic issues, they don't just vanish overnight. These acts are crucial frameworks, absolutely. They provide a legal basis for action. But the challenge now is translating that legislative intent into consistent, on-the-ground justice and accountability, especially when resource allocation and interagency cooperation remain these massive hurdles. But beyond policy, the visual movement itself, it offers this really powerful message: remembrance and a call to action. Like the official color of the MMIW movement is red. Why red? Because it's believed in many tribes to be the only color spirits can see. It's like a symbolic call, calling back missing spirits. And that iconic image you often see. The indigenous woman with a feather in her braid, a turquoise teardrop earring. It represents sorrow, yes, but also protection, strength, and prosperity. It's a really potent symbol of a community fighting to be seen, fighting for justice.
That imagery really is incredibly potent, isn't it? It serves as this constant visual reminder that there's persistent work still needed beyond just laws to really address this crisis and make sure no one is forgotten. So this deep dive into Olivia Lone Bear's story, hopefully it's shown you how it's not just, one single case. It's a tragic thread in this much larger, urgent tapestry of missing and murdered Indigenous women. And we want to reiterate Olivia's case. It is still active. The FBI says they're committed to pursuing leads. And that $10,000 reward is still offered for any actionable information.
Yeah, zooming out, I think Olivia's case just vividly illustrates that devastating combination of individual tragedy and systemic failure. You see the jurisdictional mazes, the inadequate resources for law enforcement, the socioeconomic impacts of things like resource booms. All these factors contribute to this crisis of visibility, this crisis of justice for Indigenous communities. Yet the persistent efforts of individuals, people like Lissa Yellowbird-Chase and these powerful grassroots movements, they prove that change, even though it's incredibly hard, is possible when official systems fall short.
So as you reflect on Olivia's story and the ongoing fight for justice for so many Indigenous women, maybe consider this. What role can public awareness, what role can sustained pressure really play in transforming the landscape for these cases and in ensuring that no one is truly forgotten? We urge you to remember Olivia Lone Bear and the broader MMIW movement.